Welcome to the Marketing Share Podcast. I'm your host, Alec Cheung, and I'm with Barb.
Hey guys. Alec, fun topic today.
Yep. Demand generation.
I don't know about you, but demand generation seems to be always on the mind of the marketing leader. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, because look, in marketing, right? Marketing is usually one of three things. It's either demand generation, it's your brand, or it's the more of the messaging, the product marketing. But I mean, you're not doing any of those other things without the demand, right? I mean, that's what we're on the hook for. So it's always there. Demand generation is the most probably, it's a key thing.
Yeah. So today we have a great guest. Carly Botelho is the director of demand generation at Intellimize, and Intellimize has just been acquired by Webflow. She's absolutely a superstar in this space, and she's a super fast talker. So what you're going to do is you're going to hear, and you better listen quickly because she is on the move. And what's great about Carly is it feels like she has really run the gamut in SaaS and tech fields and so forth, and can really give you the key recipe for how to make demand generation hum in your organization.
Yeah. That'll be great. We're cut from the same cloth. I'm a fast talker too, so we vibe perfectly. So let's get into it.
Hey, Alec. Barb VanSomeren here, and my co-host, Alec Cheung. How are you, Alec?
Hello, Barb. It's good to be back in studio as always.
I know. Welcome to the Marketing Share. We are here today with an exciting guest. I'm super psyched. She's a friend of the Marketing Share, Carly Botelho. Carly is the director of demand generation at Intellimize that has recently been acquired by Webflow. So she's probably got a lot of fun stories to talk about there. If anybody's been in that space before, I know I have. But welcome, Carly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So congratulations on the merger. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and what's happening? It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working in demand gen for over 10 years now, which is crazy to say. I started my career at large companies like VMware and Cisco, and then slowly made my way into the startup world with Envoy first, most recently Intellimize. And yeah, we were recently acquired by Webflow. So it's been a fun journey so far and been interesting to be back at like a more, I'd say more established organization. I don't know if Webflow would think that. They still think of themselves as a startup, but 700 employees is definitely a different animal.
Yeah, that feels more like a scale up to me.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So yeah, it's definitely been a wild ride.
It's always fun when I think a company goes through that. It's an exciting time for employees, and depending on what section you're in, right? How many times you've been through this, it can be either nerve-wracking or it can be really a fun ride for people. Are you feeling it the fun ride or what?
Yeah. It's been fun because at Intellimize, we only had like a handful of marketers and a handful of salespeople. And so to get to see like that scale now come through to like a marketing team of 60 people and a sales team of 60 people. And the sales team is really taking this and running with it. It's really cool to see like that transition from, our little scrappy team to, we're achieving scale now. Like we're having real conversations. It's like it's been really interesting.
I don't know about you, but, it seems like, Alec and I have worked in startups and scale-ups, and it seems like demand generation is the hot topic of the day, especially in these young companies that are really trying to, make it happen quickly. What are the first steps that you kind of pull together in a newer or younger company to get the demand generation engine moving?
Yeah, so I think this might be a different answer than most people would say, but I would say it's really about making sure you have the right tools and infrastructure in place to make sure you can actually capture that demand when it comes in. I think it's a big miss when people don't invest in marketing operations in the beginning. I once joined a startup that I first joined, and their contact us form on their website was completely insecure. It was basically just driving pure spam. They were getting like hundreds of spam leads a day, so they just weren't looking at it. And I was like, this is insane, right? This is like your number one way that people contact you. So like first step was like, okay, we need a marketing automation platform, right? We need to make sure we have a secure form on the website. We understand where these people are coming from, like where is all the spam coming from, but also where are the good people coming from, more importantly. And so understanding that as like the baseline is super important. Then you get into the more fun stuff, right? Like establishing who's your ICP, what channels are those people on, like how much should you be investing in order to hit your targets. and really making sure you have a full funnel approach so that, like, the way I like to think about it is if you know how many opportunities you need, back that out to figure out how many leads you need. And then if you're still not hitting that goal, but you're seeing the leads, then you can start to diagnose each of those funnel stages, right? If you just have an MQL goal, you're probably not going to hit your opportunity goal, as an example.
Carly, what about I like what you're saying. You got to get the fundamentals in place first. So then once you get into it, though, I think one of the hardest challenges often is, as a marketer, you're trying to figure out, where do I place my bets and how do I figure out where to, put my demand generation efforts? So how much in your mind do you allow for a little bit of experimentation and testing out? Because sometimes you don't know until you actually try it. Do you even agree with that premise?
Oh yeah, definitely. You don't know until you try it. And also sometimes when you try it and you don't execute it correctly, it may look like it's not working when it could be. Yeah. An example at Intellimize, when I first started, they were not running paid search. They're like, we had an agency, it wasn't working. And I was like, okay, that's like fair. But I think it can work. So let's take a step back and figure out why wasn't it working? Let's start with a small amount of budget, see where we can start to invest in that channel to make it work. And once we start to see those results, okay, now let's ramp spend until we hit our cap, right? Of, okay, this is now not efficient anymore. You've kind of figure out that sweet spot and then move on to the next channel, right? But with that said, I would caution just investing in one channel at a time. I think having a full funnel approach is better. So maybe you say, okay, we're going to try paid search, LinkedIn, Facebook, and an event. And then check all of those and see how did those compare against each other? And did those things help the results of each other, right? And versus just paid search, probably not going to see the results that you want.
Okay. So even if you have limited budget, you would still advocate for splitting it up in some way to test a few different things? Okay. All right. Actually, another question I have just on follow-up that. How much time do you give to campaign before you decide, okay, we've given it enough time for me to determine either it's not working or I'm executing it wrong?
I think it really depends on the budget. Because I think generally I'd say about a month, but if you have a lot of budget, you may want to spread that out over a quarter, right? And then see how that does over time. So I guess it really does depend. I also think quality is more important than quantity. So understanding where is the right channel, targeting marketers, we know LinkedIn is the right channel. We know marketers are on LinkedIn. So understanding how to make that channel efficient is a different strategy than will paid search work at all? And then therefore the timing of those or how much you're going to invest may be different, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about, it's kind of related to what you said, Alec, which is risk tolerance for your client, right? Or your company. I was just on a piece of business where the risk, yes, it was a month and it was LinkedIn and it wasn't very efficient for sure. We knew our customers were there because where else, is a healthcare buyer? They're not on Facebook, right? It's we did paid search and we did some other things, but it seemed to me like the time frame that we had and the budget was kind of really light to learn. Are you experienced that people don't want to spend much more time than a month?
Yeah, I think it does depend. I think it's with the story that you're going to tell, right? And setting that expectation at the beginning. I think generally I'd probably give something a quarter at the end of the day in order to really test it. But if you're only going to have $10,000, spreading that out over 3 months is going to be challenging. So it does depend on the channel and what it is that you're trying to test. But sometimes a month can be enough. We saw pretty early success on paid search. I'm okay, the right titles are coming in, the right people are coming in. Now I need a little more budget to test this effectively, right? Versus or as a different example, Facebook, like you were saying, Facebook, not performing in Intellimize. We were just getting junk. We're we're over this. But not to promote too many channels, but at Webflow, they have Clearbit, and being able to use Clearbit targeting on Facebook, we're seeing way better results. So being able to test it again, even though we're paying for Clearbit, that cost per lead and the quality that's coming through is so much stronger. Whereas in Intellimize, we just were no, we're not going to do this. So there's a lot of nuances to it, and we're targeting the same audience, right? So it's definitely interesting to see that difference.
Okay, so once you figure that out, let's say you do it, and you're hey, this is working, like in that example, I think then the next thing that comes to mind for me usually then is, all right, is this going to work if I scale? So I don't know if you have some thoughts on, hey, these are the things to watch out for though as you're scaling. And then probably the part B, maybe I should split these up and wait. But the second part of that also is I often find that it's working, but then I don't know, 3 months pass, and then like all of a sudden, wait, how come the campaign isn't working as well, right? And then you have to kind of, it's like you're like a detective. You have to figure out, wait, what just changed? Because I didn't change anything. So market changed, algorithm changed. I don't know, right? So I don't know. Maybe that I just gave you two things at once, but tell me what you think about those.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, at least for me, it's like you generally have a general cost per MQL target, or you're going to have like a CAC target, depending on the type of business that you have. So you've kind of calculated out like, how much am I willing to pay per lead or per MQL? And so scaling a channel to the point where you're not passing that, or maybe you're passing that, but when you blend it out across all your channels, you're still hitting your target. Like at Webflow, we break things up in terms of like demo requests and content downloads. So obviously we're going to pay more for a demo request than we are for a content download, but we look at that blended cost per MQL in order to determine those different channels, or we'll assign different values, right? But so I would say you generally can scale up until when you're hitting that upper limit of how much you're willing to pay. And if you're not able to scale, then I think having like more of like a full funnel approach is where it starts to make more sense. So that's what I definitely think that like, that's like the key piece of that. Also, some channels though, the more you spend, the better your efficiency is. We spend a lot more on LinkedIn at Webflow than we did at Intellimize, and our cost per lead is much lower. So I think it also does depend on the channel. Sometimes, you start to get some economy of scale, especially with like something like content syndication, right? Like they're going to give you a lower cost per lead as you spend more. So it sort of does depend on the channel and what you're looking to do. What was the second part of your question?
Just about how then it's working fine one day, and then like the next month you realize, well, how come our scores how come our results just went down? We didn't change anything.
It's like I don't know, the $1 million question, right? But I think that also does depend on the channel. I think one thing I've noticed is having some flexibility in your budget and what it is that you're doing is really important. So there are definitely weeks where paid search is doing terrible. So it's like, okay, let's like scale down paid search for this week and scale up something else.
Okay.
And then let's scale paid search back up and scale down something else back. Like having that flexibility across channels, I think is important. And then, like you said, like looking into it, like, are there certain, Google does change things a lot, right? So like on a random day, all of a sudden we're getting a bunch of, junk, or like the quality's gone down, and I'm like, what's going on? Oh, like Google decided that its phrase match is now basically so broad that we were just seeing like a bunch of irrelevant keywords. So doing the work of like negative scrubbing those, okay, now we're back to where we wanted to be. So and then also new content, right? Like I think at some point, like bringing new content into the fold is important.
Yeah, freshening it up a little. Right.
That's definitely what I see.
People do there is such a thing as fatigue, right? I mean, after a while, you can't run something forever and expect it to be completely the same impact, I would think. Maybe in B2B, it's different, on a separate spectrum. I'm glad you talked about the notion of you're willing to pay more than target for certain things, So I'll give you an example in a business that I had. I was trying to generate tests for people who are 65 years old, right? So the channels were really different and everything. And I would actually pay more to get a consistency on one channel when it was even not as efficient as another channel, because I needed the volume per location, right? So you're willing to make those trade-offs, I think, depending on what the needs of the business are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Recently we spoke with a friend of ours, both of them, and we talked about the idea of, an attribution strategy is not always really necessary. I don't know, it seems to me like I'm always being asked how we're spending the money. And in order to really be able to articulate that well, do you have to have an attribution strategy? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it ultimately depends on what your definition of an attribution strategy is. But I definitely think you need some type of attribution strategy. Like you just said, people want to know, I'm spending this much on this channel. What am I getting out of it? And so like, obviously there's like the high level metrics of like cost per lead, like fine, you can compare X and see how much that lead costs versus Y, but that's not ultimately what you want. Like you want to know how many opportunities am I getting out of this and how much closed won. So I do think you need some kind of attribution strategy. Now the type and like all of that gets very nuanced, and I think it can get really complicated really quickly. And so understanding your data and like what makes sense for your business and like trying to just get a baseline is important. But like me personally, I look at records one by one sometimes. Like I'm like, where did these demo requests come from? What's the story here? And that helps me understand, is our attribution model even right? Or like, do we need to change it? And then also I think at maybe like a higher level where I would start that conversation is, I think a lot of companies want to do marketing versus sales. Like did marketing drive this or did sales drive this?
Oh,
And I hate that. Like, I
me
think
too.
one goal, like marketing and sales should have a shared goal. Outbound should be considered a channel. We do want to know how outbound is doing, but it shouldn't be like, oh, they outbounded, but you know, because they had a marketing touch at this point, and now we're like fighting over who got the lead. Like it doesn't.
Oh my God, right? I've been there too.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's the
matter.
worst. You know, facilitate teamwork. Don't,
Yeah.
put us into an adversarial place. I think that's a pain.
Right. And if you're doing your marketing correctly and you have an awareness strategy, then when your sales rep outbounds, they're probably more likely to get that meeting, right? So these things are going together anyway, even if like your UTMs aren't tracking that at that specific level, and like understanding that's important.
Do you incorporate outbound in all of your, like a combination of outbound and inbound in your demand generation efforts?
Yeah.
Yeah, you always do? Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you use for outbound?
So at Webflow today, we do have an SDR team. So they're only focused on outbound. And so historically that has been a lot. They're generating a lot of their own campaigns. What we're actually trying to do now is really bring in like a full account-based marketing strategy, where I think that outbounding effort is going to see a lot more success, right? Because what we were just talking about in terms of like, you've got the air cover for marketing against those accounts, you have sales also working those accounts. The likelihood of success is much higher. So like, that's something we're actually still implementing now.
Let's just take an example, like, in the case study world, okay, a SaaS business in the B2B tech world, right? What are your go-to top 3 to 5 channels that typically you will go to for demand gen on a regular basis?
Yeah. So I think I'd say, paid channels we were just talking about. Like, I do think paid search is important, though executing it correctly can be a challenge, especially for B2B SaaS. Paid social, LinkedIn and Facebook. Obviously folks are getting into like TikTok that are more creative and things like that. I will say I have not experimented with that yet, though I think we probably should. Events are another big one, both for trade shows and also like just general networking events. And then I would say more the stuff that goes in the middle of your funnel, right? Like email and webinars, and really being a thought leader in this space, and really being able to like nurture folks. They may not be ready the second they come in, but they will be ready at some point, or at least be interested in learning more. And so I think those are channels we definitely should not ignore, and are important as well.
I think a theme there, what struck me when you were saying that, thought came to mind was like, you cannot half step your way into demand generation. Right. I mean, you can't like you've got to like be willing to commit enough in order to cover the span of the things, because you've said, hey, multi-channel is better, split it. You're going to get better results that way. But then you're also talking about hitting all the different stages of the funnel. Right. So don't just hit one part of the funnel. Consider the other channels that also allow you to hit mid funnel and even end of funnel.
Yeah, so definitely. Like one channel I didn't mention that I do think some companies see success with is content syndication. But that's a hard one sometimes because it is very top of funnel at the end of the day. Like they're not downloading the content from your website, right? They probably don't even know where they got the content from. And so having a really strong nurture strategy can drive results from content syndication. But if you don't have that, you're kind of missing a piece of the puzzle, right? You're not going to see success from content syndication.
That's a great one. I don't hear much about content syndication. That's a good one that you brought up. Actually leads me to another follow-up question, which is, let's say you're a smaller team, and I think you have some experience on this. So you are, limited resources. What are the areas in demand gen that you would look to outsource to an expert versus still try to do on your own, whether it's you or maybe you've got like just one marketing staff person? What things are easier to maybe carve out as like, okay, I'm going to get a specialist. Like, I don't know if it's content syndication, but I'm going to get a specialist to do this area. I'm going to find a contractor to do this area. Any thoughts or suggestions there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you're a sole marketer, I would definitely look for an agency for marketing operations, because I do think that can take a fair amount of time, or have like a contractor or something on that front, per what we were talking about at the beginning. And then a paid media agency helps a lot, especially if you're trying to set up paid search at the beginning. It's a painful process, and you need to be in there like negativing. I'm like, that's not even a word. Putting negative keywords in there like every hour, like maybe every day. It's a huge time suck. And so like, when we first launched it, I'm in there doing that. I'm like, ultimately, like, this is a waste of time, right? Like, we need to find somebody else that can have a better lens on this and also make sure we're seeing that success. So I definitely would say a paid media agency, and marketing operations is where I would probably start.
Okay. Yeah. And then which would you bring in so if you start to grow, what would you bring in first?
Also marketing ops. Yeah.
Marketing ops?
Yeah, for sure. I think that making sure you have that infrastructure and able to tell the story about what's performing well. Like, if you don't know, if you're investing in these channels and you don't actually know how they're performing, like, you're not going to get anywhere. So I think that's really important. And then the second would be more of just like a generalist demand gen manager that can work across all those different funnels we were talking about. Could manage a paid media agency, but could also write and send up emails, Marketo, right? Or like can also set up a webinar program. Like, the sort of like more programmatic approaches to demand gen, and actually the executioner on those is really important.
Yeah, because if you're doing events and you're doing paid and you're doing, you've got to actually work in all the execution for that, because it's a lot of execution that you're looking at. What about the RevOps person? Do you put the RevOps person later on in a larger team?
In terms of like sales operations, more so than marketing operations? Yeah.
The straddler.
Yeah. I think it really, I've seen it set up many different ways in many different companies. We had a sales operations contractor most recently, which was really helpful. So I think I've generally seen sales operations sit on sales, and I've generally seen that come before marketing operations. Like, generally they've had that person beforehand. But I guess it does depend. I have also worked with marketing operations people who can dabble enough in sales ops that it's at a small company. I think that's important. Like, hire a marketing ops person that knows Salesforce. Like, it will save you a lot of heartache, at least in the beginning, before you have enough resourcing to hire a full-time person.
Yeah. I mean, example, I just worked with a marketing operations person who is really like a sales enablement person at this company, who is really, really terrific at it. Right. So somebody who cares enough to track every single lead, knowing where it's going, and making sure that we have the appropriate content back is huge.
Yeah, definitely.
To close up that funnel. So talk to me about some of the biggest wins that you've had. I love stories about, when somebody hits it out of the park. I've heard you're a big ball hit it out of the park person. So I would love to hear some of the win stories.
Yeah, I won't say which company this was, but when I first stepped into a role, I didn't really know what I was walking into, and I joined my first pipeline call, and they had 2 open opportunities. Like, the pipeline call was 5 minutes. They were like, "Here's the 2 ops we're working," and then it ended, and I was like, what did I sign up for? Like, oh gosh. And like, looking into like what's happening, they just basically all the things we just talked about. They did not have a demand generation funnel at the end of the day. They had kind of, they had a website, the forms were working, like the basics from like the marketing ops standpoint were there, but the channel mix was wrong. Weren't investing in the right areas, weren't able to really track and see which of these were coming from where. And so it was all the things we were just starting from the beginning of getting those things in place, showcasing that like we have to test some of these channels again, test some events that maybe we haven't gone to in the past, things like that. And it ultimately over like 6 months led to like, we were then at like over 100 opportunities. So it was a huge win and really exciting to see that growth and that scale. But yeah, it was fun at the beginning. The other thing I'll say is like, one thing that was fun in Intellimize is we were marketing to marketers, right? So we got to run really fun campaigns. And like that, I think we don't, as marketing teams, especially if we're like talking to IT or we're talking to security, like it can get kind of boring. We have to remember that we're marketing to people, right? And like, let's have a little bit of fun and let's do things that are going to stand out amongst everything else that's doing. And so having the opportunity to run really creative campaigns and see the results from those specifically was really exciting. Look, we did one on Convertapalooza, which was this whole, we like all sat down and created these like crazy marketing rock star names, like all this stuff. And like, it was, it really got our brand name out there as doing something different.
That's fun.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's been your toughest market to solve? Like, because the target is very difficult to understand. It was for you, very difficult to understand or to get a handle on.
Yeah, I worked at a startup where we were an API. It was kind of like the B to C, where they were going to white label our solution and then use it on their side. And so it was a totally different demand gen motion. This was not an inbound motion where you're like waiting for people to come to you. This was like, there's probably only 200 companies in the world that are going to use this. So we have to go after those 200 companies like really hard. And so it was like basically only account-based marketing. So a very different approach than what we've been talking about today. But setting that up from the foundations of, okay, like making sure we like have account-based marketing tools and like a totally different set of activities that you're going to do against those accounts and working really closely with the sales team. So that was like a big learning curve for me and still was like but it was an interesting challenge.
Yeah. I'm in love with when you're able to get some of these wins on your resume, right? And it talks about how you improved, the cost per acquisition, or, you lowered these things, or you improved ROI and those kinds of. So is that some of what you've, obviously, if you went from 2 opportunities to 100, that number has improved, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You have a couple of those that you could speak to. I mean, because that's amazing, right? When you can talk to that kind of a number.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to the attribution point too, of like, you can look at individual channels and see that ROI. Like I was saying, like, paid search wasn't working. We got it to work. That was exciting on like a channel level. But I think more interesting is when you find the right mix so that your overall metrics are improving, right? You know how much your marketing budget is. You know how much the marketing team is driving. And as long as you're driving more than you're spending and you're hitting your targets, like that's ultimately what matters. And so I see a lot of times where people are like, oh, like this channel is not working. Let's just like turn it off. But it is fueling some other channel that is working. And so you start to see that like your results start to get worse when you stop investing in the channel you didn't think was working. And vice versa. So I think like, obviously, if you can like clearly see a channel isn't working, I'm not saying leave it on. But I think that there's some, it's really interesting when all these things play together and you're hitting your targets that way to improve like results like exponentially versus just like, okay, I improved paid search by like 5%.
Yeah, no, I've been there as well, right? The blended number is the number that you care about. I mean, you have to learn about the individual channels, but if you can, I did an overall cost per acquisition reduction, of like 15% on a very super stable old business that had been doing it for a long time. And that's huge money. You kind of have to tell people what you're doing and what it means to their business a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. And the other channel I think is interesting and we haven't talked quite as much about is events. Like I've seen a lot of people are not investing as much in events because they're not seeing that direct ROI. And so it's like twofold. It's one, like I do think there's a place for events. Like if you completely cut events out, like I was saying, you're going to start to see your overall results go down, especially if you're going to the right events. But really making events like more impactful and thinking through like how you can make the most out of an event, like just going and having a booth and like standing there. Yeah. You're not going to see the results that you want. So making sure you have a full strategy and like pick the right events is super important.
And you don't have to display all the time, right? Sometimes you actually go to an event to meet key individuals or that kind of thing. It's not always about the booth and the exhibition, right? But you're exactly right? I mean, if you pull that out, that's a serious risk to many, many B2B businesses, in my mind.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you can make events more impactful? I like that recommendation.
I mean, first, I think is like what Barb was just saying, like networking. Like networking is really important. I've gone to events where salespeople just want to stand at the booth and they don't want to go and walk around and talk to people. And I'm like, I don't know why I brought you. So like, go out there, go talk to people, go have conversations. Like, you don't have to be selling to everybody. It's more about getting to know your buyer, and then they're going to want to learn more about what it is that you're doing. I've also seen ancillary events like tack something on, like your audience is there, like host a happy hour, host a dinner, host a breakfast. And then you get to control the conversation a little bit better too. And I mean, I think this one's obvious, but I won't go to an event if we don't have a speaking session. Like, a way to get in front of the audience to drive traffic to your, to have conversations with you afterward. If you're not doing that, you're just at the booth, like, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I think the kickoff meeting is mission critical, right? What are we here to do?
Yeah.
What's our job while we're all here, right? Aligning the team on what we're actually doing. If it's shaking a couple new hands, yes, it's always about business, of course, but sometimes it's about, I want you to get 10 new friends that are going to have a meeting in the next quarter with you, right? I mean, it's, and having some targets in mind is probably good. And they don't always have to be, wait for the booth, wait for somebody to place an order, because that is kind of rare today, right?
Yeah. One thing I saw a company do once I was really impressed by, and I've always wanted to replicate it, is at a trade show, they had pre-printed a bunch of it was like a study of some kind, but they had printed the people's names and their companies on them. They were like personalized, like, it was like an ROI study type deal. And as we walked by, my friend worked at a large organization, and they were like, "Oh, Sarah, like, we've been waiting for you. Like, here's your personalized like study." And I was like, wow, that was like well played. And I'm surprised I don't see more people doing that now. It's like, if you can create something that's related to your business that's impactful to folks, like, you should.
Yeah, like an ROI or performer or something like that. I love that idea.
What do you do to track events? Like, how much tracking do you do? Just like, all the names and everything like that? Is it just basically that? Or is there any other tips or suggestions that you have on how to somehow measure the effect of the event?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention, I think everybody should do, is at the beginning, like, especially now with like ChatGPT and stuff, like, get the list in advance. Like, I was hearing like, oh, we don't have the list. And I'm like, don't we have access to the app? Like, get in the app, like, get the names now and do some pre-outreach first. So hopefully we already have the list. But then on top of that, tracking, like, who did you meet with? Obviously there's like the booth stands, the ancillary events that you had, who attended your speaking session, and be really specific with your follow-up from there in terms of like, what did that person engage with? And like, if we talk to them on the show floor, like, make sure it's that personalized experience for that person, especially from the person who was there and spoke to them, like, have them do the initial follow-up. But I do think just like looking at that and like, your CRM or whatever, and being able to track that specifically, we can directly tie like, how many ops do we get out of this event, and even in the future. I think we tend to see like, we get ops like right after, and then maybe like 3 months later, people come back through. And so making sure you're able to tie those back to like, okay, we met with them at the event, and then they later came back to know, like, was that worth our time?
I've experienced that too, right after the event and 3 months later. And, it's almost like there's a strategy there, right? Which is, hey, let's dial back to these folks at this particular time. They're probably thinking about it again, probably budget time, and this is the actual perfect time to do it. It's just like thinking through your strategy and making sure it's not about one event, even though it's an event, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Carly, we
awesome.
really appreciate your time. Yeah, coming on to Marketing Share and sharing your expertise. If people want to find out more about you or just connect with you, where can they go?
Oh yeah, definitely LinkedIn. Message me on LinkedIn. That was probably the best place. I'm not savvy enough to have a website yet. Maybe one day.
Well, good luck to you. I mean, super exciting on the Webflow and everything in your future. And we wish you the best. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.